I'd like to extend to all of you a very warm welcome to Break Glass Moments and Not So Silent Coups, the CCPA's inaugural lecture of the Tony Clarke Speaker Series. I'm Erica Shaker. I'm director of the CCPA's national office, and like many of you, I'm someone whose life was profoundly impacted by Tony's work and legacy. I would like to introduce Karl Clarke. Karl? Tony's wife and Polaris Institute board member. Karl will conclude tonight's discussion. Adrian Harewood, that table over there, veteran journalist and faculty member of the School of Journalism and Communications at Carleton University, will moderate the conversation and introduce the panel. And much gratitude to our friends at the Broadbent Institute who very graciously offered us the opportunity to host this event at the Progress Summit, allowing us to include even more glorious troublemakers in celebration of Tony's profound legacy, which transcended generations and borders. Some quick housekeeping notes. There are water stations set up in the room, not bottled water. A cash bar outside. I understand that you will need a ticket. You'll need to purchase a ticket in order to get a drink, and the hotel is just making those arrangements, so it may take a minute, but that's how it's going to work. And some light snacks, because revolutions require energy. Tony was a friend, ally, and mentor to civil society, and a great friend to the CCPA. In addition to being a board member and research associate, Tony was a celebrated CCPA author with publications like Silent Coup, Tar Sand Showdown, and Inside the Bottle, along with countless reports and articles, a selection of which are available for review on the table outside this room. His analysis was always prescient, always insightful, and it always centered humanity and compassion. And that's what I consider Tony's greatest gift to civil society, his deep love for humanity, his prioritizing of community, and his commitment to supporting and celebrating the next generation of activists. This speaker series honors Tony's life work of strengthening democracy and beating back the corporate agenda by bringing together the progressive community to celebrate those who continue this work and to reflect on our own roles and responsibilities. My colleagues and I at CCPA are honored to be entrusted with this task and the opportunity to celebrate such a key figure in Canadian civil society. May we do justice to Tony's work by continuing to do justice in our lives, workplaces, and communities. Tonight, Adrian will facilitate a discussion between Karl Flecker and Nora Loreto, and he'll do a proper introduction for both. But before that begins, and in the spirit of Tony's commitment to community, we'd like you to take the next 10 minutes to introduce yourselves to your neighbors at your table and share what brings you here today. So you have 10 minutes. And if you're at a sparsely populated table, we invite you to move to another with more of a critical mass. But this actually looks pretty good. And in those 10 minutes, we also want you to reflect on and share with your table what you think our greatest hope for a radically democratic, anti-corporate agenda is. You can draw on your own experiences as an activist or your observations about where we're at today in this particular moment. We can agree that things look bleak. They are bleak. But we are also seeing transformative acts of resistance and creativity. We cannot afford to muse, somebody really should do something about all this. We want to know, what do you think doing something about this looks like for us in this moment? And don't nuance it, be direct, because Adrian, after the 10 minutes is 10 minutes are up, Adrian will then ask some of you to distill your discussions down to 1 or 2 sentences, which will help inform the conversation he will then be facilitating. And when that conversation concludes, he will turn things over to Karl, who will bring the event to a close. Once again, thank you so much for joining us here tonight, for your participation, your solidarity, and your humanity. So just now's the time for you to discuss, to introduce yourselves, and Adrian, over to you. Everyone, your 10 minutes are up. Everyone, your 10 minutes are up. It's a hard stop.
Testing. They can't hear me.
I can hear you. These three now? Okay. Everyone, we're turning it over to Adrian.
Testing. Can everyone hear me? Do I need to speak up a little bit more? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. So thanks so much, Erica. So I should introduce myself. My name is Adrian Harewood. I am a professor in the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University and currently host a podcast called In Bed with the Elephant. And it's a delight for me to be here this evening. At this moment, before I introduce our panelists and speaker, you've now had an opportunity to meet your neighbor. And I think you've now been properly introduced to folks at your table. The question that Erica had posed was this one. What do you think, what is our greatest hope for a radically democratic, anti-corporate agenda? So I'm going to try and go to about 5 or 6 different tables, and I'm going to do this kind of Oprah or Phil Donahue. This is a young crowd, so you don't remember Phil Donahue. That was a joke. Some of you remember Phil Donahue, all right? But I'm going to do Phil Donahue. So I'm going to go over here, and I want you to maybe sum up what happened at your table. So is there anyone here who has something that they'd like to say? Recognizing some familiar Carleton faces here. Anyone have something to say about what you talked about in terms of addressing that question? And if you can just introduce yourself.
My name is Laheen, and I'm from TMU, currently representing TMU as an undergrad. We joined the table late, but then what we were talking about is I was trying to introduce myself, and then my fellow here from TMU as well, he was trying to represent himself. And then we just had a fun conversation about how there's professors here from Carleton, there's different people from different cities, and then just getting to know each other more. And it was a nice conversation. They're nice people and then good professionals. Yeah, it was fun. It's just that we joined late, but we could have explored more about it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that question, what do you think is our greatest hope for a radically democratic, anti-corporate agenda? Right? Is there anyone here who's willing to take on that question? Who has an answer? Not yet? Okay, we can come back to you. Sure. Sir.
Hi, I'm Mathieu. You need to listen to Sandy Nora podcast.
Yes.
That's a big thing you need to do.
Thank you.
No, we just talked about what's the state of our the labor movement and all that, and what we can do to motivate workers and members and all that to collectively bring change and organize and all that. That's that. Well, we that's a good question. Maybe we can help finance a social movement, organizing and try to mobilize our members to help. Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, I just arrived, and so I've just been chatting with an Ottawa neighbor here. Indigenous people are our hope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is James Adair. We talked about the cuts to OSAP at our table, and I think there's a lot of interesting thoughts and strategies that came up that can apply to that question. And I think the main takeaway is that we have to look at unusual alliances that we wouldn't otherwise think about. It might be, labor unions working with students working with civil society organizations that they might never have been involved with, those kinds of places where community and conversations aren't typically happening.
Thank you. Please don't be shy. Okay. I know some of you, so I know this is not a shy crowd. Okay.
Okay, sure. Maybe we'll pass the mic. Well, in the collaborative spirit, we will share the mic. We started from a foundation of talking about Tony Clarke's work with the Green Economy Network, which is a coalition of unlikely partners. And fundamentally, the work there was about radical publicization of major infrastructure projects. We're talking about doing things faster, doing huge things in a streamlined way. How do we ensure that those are good green jobs, that those are unionized jobs? And how do we do that in a way that is radically transparent? How do we ensure that the corporations that are involved are being held to account, and that it's done so in a way that is not just a greenwashed version of the brown economy?
And as far as how we do that, how we kind of cut them out, really it's just the end of P3 projects. There's all these large nation-building projects like the Alto project, and of course we want to be able to use Canadian labor, Canadian hardware and equipment, Canadian steel. But if it's set up as a P3 project, well, then it's really up to Alto to do whatever they want, because the conversation, the agreement that we have is, we're the Canadian government, we don't want to spend any money, you're a private contractor, you've got the Peter Thiels backing you to give you the billions you need to build this stuff out, I don't want to pay higher taxes, you guys want to make profit, the only people who get screwed are the actual people taking the train, and if we want to be able to control all of these items, Canadian labor, Canadian material, we need to control those projects. We can't just keep on giving these away as P3s. So I do think that the only way to win is not to play, unfortunately, with these corporations.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, shit. I'm Kareem Premji.
I'm Marnie Gerard.
Okay, thanks so much. Cheers. Thank you. On this side of the room, yes. Okay. So, 1 more minute. Okay, no problem. Sure. Hi, I'm Murungi.
I'm just gonna. Hi.
Hi.
I'm a big fan. I just want anyone who's fasting in the room. That's 1 minute until iftar.
I'll be super fast. We're living in our table. So I'm Laura, and we have a table here from mainly union folks from CUPE, PIPS, and ACFO. So we acknowledge that we're living in a radical time, and so radical responses are required. Bold, real responses are required. And so for us, there needed to be responses that centered on reciprocal care, on community responses and community care, and things that we could build, but not just in a typical way. And thinking about, we talked about indigenous responses, talked about different community responses, and not just accepting or replicating some of the systems that we had. And so we're done.
What does community care look like? What does that mean?
You should all read a really great book I'm reading right now. It's called Let This Radicalize You, and it's about community responses to organizing, and they're going to say it far better than I ever could, so read the book.
You said it well. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's time for iftar right now. For those of you who practice, it is 5:55. So I just want to allow folks to, if they need to, perhaps leave the room, you may. Okay? Couple other responses? Okay. It's a very well-behaved crowd. In the West Indies, we'd say that you have broad-upsy.
We talked at length about tariffs and the impact on the working class people, and finding the hope is finding ways to show solidarity with workers across borders and not letting this be a reason we're being divided. So yeah, in particular, we talked about the auto sector, but also, like wood, steel, other things in the country.
And time for one more. One other contribution? Sure. And please do introduce yourself.
So gagashe den dagosindish na hason maskwana dotem inanoi or skonina dobs katakmagshe sipik dochin mechanakaskonina mechanakskindochin. So my spirit name is the one who behaves elderly. I'm from the Bear Clan. I'm Inano through my mother from Attawapiskat. I'm Eo through my father from Chisasibi. I'm a Turtle Islander citizen from Turtle Island. I'm also known as Jocelyn Wabano Ayatel. And I think my son is calling me. I can hear my phone. So we didn't get a chance to share the table, but my friend here and I, we just reunited after not seeing each other for a while. And we got into a conversation about our previous activism. We used to get into a lot of trouble. In fact, CSIS put me on a terrorist list. So, right? Exactly. Woo-hoo. Anyhow, I'm down with that. So Canute and I, like as I stated, we've been in the front line on climate change and various events, but tonight we were talking about healthcare and the different things that has happened, like from a personal experience, right? The privatization of healthcare, how it's become inaccessible in a lot of ways to a lot of people, and especially some of the most vulnerable, right? And speaking about corporations, one of the things I know from lived experience is we had De Beers mining our diamonds in western coast of James Bay, my mother's territory. But we've also had Stornoway mining the diamonds on so-called Quebec, my father's territory. We've had the hydroelectric project, and now again in where my grandmother and my mother were born, we have the Ring of Fire. That's Doug Ford wanting to bulldoze his way. So there's been a lot of talk about sovereignty and, you know, the public interest and Indigenous. I don't like that term Indigenous, but that's what they call us, Indigenous rights, right? And again, they talked about free, prior, and informed consent. And the issue that I have with free, prior, and informed consent is, I always say there's three components. There's the free, prior, and informed consent that is based on colonialism, their understanding under colonialism. And then when they supposedly consult with our people, they go to the Indian Act chiefs and councillors, which again is colonialism. If you know about the Indian Act, it's responsible for the Indian residential school, the 60 Scoop, the Indian Day School, so on and so forth. It's genocidal policies, right? So the third component that I really strongly would ask for people's help to advocate for us is that the free, prior, and informed consent be based on our ways, where you come to the people. We are the rights holders. We hold title to our land. Again, I don't like that word title, but I'm expressing it so that people can understand that we are the land. When I say Inino from Ininoaski, when I say Eo from Eoischi, it's like someone who identifies as Scottish from Scotland. You know, I would never impose myself to the point that I would go and rape and pillage their land, because you're doing it to the person. So thank you, miigwech.
Thank you. And thank you all. Thank you all for your contributions. At this point, I'm going to introduce someone who is actually an old friend. About 30 years ago, I needed a lot of help as a young person. I had my first job working at the Kingston Global Community Center that some of you might be familiar with. It was an activist center in Kingston. And this man kind of took me under his wing and helped to mentor me and made me accountable and took care of me. So it's really a delight for me to have this opportunity to introduce Karl Flecker. Karl has been a social activist for over 30 years, and during that time he has implemented citizen-based campaigns opposing corporate power, organized innovative actions on the front lines of international trade and investment meetings, led community-based campaigns effectively challenging the bottled water industry's exploitation of public water systems, unmasked corporate influence and their exploitation of the public healthcare system. Karl has worked as an immigrant employment specialist and served as the National Director for Human Rights and Anti-Racism with the Canadian Labour Congress. He has spoken at the United Nations, union conventions, conferences, community events, and village forums across North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. He was a longtime senior staffer with the Polaris Institute, and Karl was a board member at the Polaris Institute for some 20 years. He is a grandpa, soon to be for the third time, and Karl, it was also a friend of Tony's. Tony Clarke was his colleague, Tony Clarke was his comrade, and most importantly, Tony Clarke was his friend. Please give a very warm welcome to Karl Flecker.
Thanks, folks. Those chairs look visually very attractive. They're hell to sit in. So I'm going to just take a few minutes up top here. Thank you very much, Adrian. That's very kind of you. I got to do a lot of that stuff because of my friend Tony. I also want to thank Erica and the wonderful CCPA staff and supporters who helped put this gig together tonight. And same to the good folks at Broadbent for the collaboration. I also want to acknowledge some of the many people that Tony recruited, worked with, and was an ally with in the pursuit for social and environmental justice, while always being laser focused on kicking corporate ass. There are also the PI staff, Polaris Institute staff Tony and I worked with. Karl, Danielle, Darren, Lucy, Jake, Karen, Kimiko, Richard, Stephen, Susan, and that's just to name a few of those who worked at our Ottawa offices, Diane in the US office. And there were others like Anuradha Mittal, Dorothy Keat, Steve Schreibman, Vandana and her sister Dr. Mira Shiva, Oscar and Marcel Oliveira, Tom Goldtooth, Starhawk, and so many more who we worked with internationally. And then there are the PI board members, some of whom are in the room, from the late Heather Jane Robertson, and those in the room, Marnie Gerard, Bruce Campbell, who edited recently the book Corporate Rules, The Real World of Business Regulation in Canada. And I'm hoping during the Q&A we can get Bruce to add a few thoughts about regulatory capture and how corporations have been creating regulations for their own interest and not public interest. It's not possible to name everyone who provided amazing support, brilliant research, and cutting analysis and courage. PI was fortunate to work with many giants challenging corporate rule. I've been reminiscing a lot about some of that work with Tony, and I hope you'll just indulge me with a few stories that showcase some of Tony's work. I get to do the reminiscence part here. Because I think that those stories also point to important legacy work, but things that we need to contribute doing to answer the question, where is radical hope to be found? So let's start in India. Coca-Cola had been sucking the groundwater out from thousands of small farm plots in southern India. Communities were being devastated. Water shortages meant crop failures, which meant loss of income, which meant more poverty. And at one point, mass suicides amongst farmers who had lost everything had become tragically commonplace. Activists and researchers correctly pointed to the culprit, a Coca-Cola bottling plant harvesting groundwater. Nonviolent resistance protests took place in front of the plant gates, and it was sustained on a daily basis for years. Regional, national, and eventually international attention caught fire. Tony and I and a large contingent of World Water Warriors, perhaps the first WWW, were invited to join the local protests. We spoke at one of their rallies to thousands of farmers in attendance. We offered detailed information about Coca-Cola's corporate structures, its supply chains, its financial vulnerabilities, and the names and the vanities of its corporate board members. We reciprocated by inviting Southern Indian water activists to a Coke shareholder meeting in Pennsylvania. We had secured some shareholder proxy seats, thanks to the good troublemakers in the faith communities who'd bought the odd share here and there so we could get inside access. I recall Tony was front and center, challenging the Coke CEO and board member at the time, Warren Buffett, 17-year-long board member. We made no friends that day amongst the corporate suits or the greedy shareholders. In fact, I recall that Buffett got really ticked, and he actually threw one of the monogrammed Coca-Cola pens like a spear my way, as we were making points about the scale and the immorality of the water thefts that were taking place in southern India. Some Tony takeaways, as I call them. Challenging corporate rule means forging alliances with communities who are on the ground and directly and deeply affected. It means sticking with them over the long haul. It means providing relevant research and at times getting inside the beast and being disruptive as hell with truth. South Africa. Despite a constitutional guarantee that its citizens have access to water to meet basic daily needs, corporate interests target water and sanitation services globally because there's trillions of dollars on the table. Polaris, alongside a team of water activists, helped identify who those water barons are. And Tony's corporate X-ray methodology deconstructed how big corporations function. That X-ray methodology exposes environmental and legal liabilities. It exposes patterns and practices of corruption, bribery, malfeasance, and ridiculous pricing systems, or its build, operate, and lease financing structures. Polaris turned complex corporate structures into understandable narratives. Tony and I, alongside our in-country allies, we held teach-ins in the townships. We helped explain the complexities that people knew intuitively from their own experiences of oppression. Tony used to say, in the face of such brutalizing inequality, there can be no democracy. Together, we forged acts of resistance to reassert citizen power. We worked with the South African Municipal Workers Union, who were given this horrible task of shutting off the water supplies of their neighbors who couldn't afford the outrageously expensive metered water. Imagine rolling into your neighborhood and shutting off your neighbor's water supply. So resistance has to be creative. So SAMU workers, and us along them, we laid out the tools that were necessary to shut off the water supply. They also had set up step-by-step illustrated cards prepared to show what the procedures were to shut off people's water. Richard Bricks McCullough, our South African counterpart, he gathered the angry neighbors around and explained that if the disconnect steps are reversed, and if we bypass the meter, see cards 5 and 6, then the water can flow freely again. Bricks could be found on Sunday at the church pulpit in the township, encouraging community members to break the meter and free the water. His nickname, Bricks, was not for nothing. Water is a human right, and it's being hijacked for corporate gain. Same with electricity. The state-owned electricity utility, Eskom, as it was known at the time, generates and distributes 95% of the country's power. But corporate practices govern how that state-owned utility operate, meaning that cutoffs were common for the poor who can't afford high rates. Enter the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, who challenged how state-owned utilities had lost touch with its responsibilities to citizens. It also meant a team of activists, including myself, went and reconnected homes that had been disconnected. One day, we climbed up onto a shanty house rooftop to reconnect a grandmother who had been disconnected from the grid. She had been forced to burn charcoal in her home for 2 years, and the fumes had taken her sight and her respiratory system. We were armed with just a couple of tools, my colleague and I remember we climbed this pole into this mess of wires. And I recall asking, with a hell of a lot of intrepidation, how sure are we that the power's off? And with this big, booming South African accent and wide grin, my comrade said, "Brother, you'll know in a flash if we're wrong." Not reassuring, pal. Tony's takeaway. Corporate resistance means challenging state-owned utilities that have lost their way. And I think Nora's going to have some things to say about that in terms of our version of crown corporations. Challenging corporate rule also relies on working with local communities to identify and exploit those avenues that can disrupt the flow of profit. It can mean taking electrifying risks. South and Central America, Polaris, under Tony's leadership, we allied with academics in Mexico, researching corporations linked to accelerating the global climate crisis. We collaborated with cartographers, artists, researchers to create big, colorful maps that helped activists locate corporate headquarters, their supply chains, their depots, their locations and residence of their board members, their banks, and other key points of vulnerability. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Remember the James Bond movie, Quantum of Solace? It ripped from the real-world events in Cochabamba, Bolivia, where water privatization had gone rabid. A state-owned water utility came under pressure from the World Bank to privatize, and a consortium came together involving Bechtel, one of the water barons, and other investors to buy the state-owned utility. Mass movement protests took place, and our comrade Oscar was a key leader. So too were indigenous communities, farmers, teachers, unions, youth, community leaders, and so many more who creatively and courageously put their bodies on the line to resist the privatization agenda. There's a space for hope, putting our bodies on the line. Players like the World Bank, international tribunals, pushing self-serving World Trade Organization trade and investment rules, and powerful political figures like Evo Morales all had roles to play. Polaris held teach-ins at World Social Forums where we retold this story, but in the context of a people's court as counter to the corporately run tribunals that sought to own the reign. Different judgments were reached when people prevail. Tony's takeaways. Challenging corporate rule means storytelling that acknowledges where people are at in their struggles against corporate giants. It means beginning at the tap or the community well and tracing it back to the corporate boardrooms and the international institutions like the World Bank and their posse. It means telling that story, identifying those key players, and that can build community and global resistance. Japan, 2003. Japan hosts a World Water Forum. These are triannual events that are focused on water security, sustainability, and international cooperation. They also serve as global forums for water barons to set global policy on water services that can serve their financial interests. PI was able to get a role in the 2003 World Water Forum. Oddly, the Japanese government came to Canada to meet with Polaris and the Council of Canadians because we had a global reputation on these issues. And they wanted us to attend and speak on behalf of global water activists, globally, continentally. The Japanese government sought some balance to the burly corporate voices that dominated these forums. So Polaris negotiated with the Japanese government to fund hundreds of water activists to attend under our coordination. I got to tell you, originally the plan was that we were going to request funding for maybe a dozen activists or voices, but at the last minute, in a bit of bravado, I ratcheted up the demand to hundreds of voices from around the world, and they bought it. So our global crew arrived when we challenged every session over 3 cities over 11 days of the conference. We worked closely with activists from across Japan. We made thousands of cloth banners imprinted with the words, "Water is life," in many, many languages. And these head banners were distributed to the 10,000 attendees by our crew of less than 200. In short, a few short days, the conference was being challenged on a daily basis by our teams and those we had recruited. And then there were thousands of attendees supporting the banner, "Water is life." Sessions featuring corporate spokespeople were disrupted by teams holding up lie meters that were animated by bells that rang whenever they fibbed about who would be paying and who would be profiting if they were allowed to control global water policy. Tony's takeaways. Challenging corporate rules means being aware of the existence of the nearly invisible forums on the global stage that are busy plotting to advance a corporate rules agenda. And it means dancing inside those spaces and kicking up some dust. Tony mattered. His legacy in courageously kicking corporate butt continues to matter for the many. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Karl, for that very touching, heartfelt tribute. We really, really do appreciate that. You really honored Tony with that, so thank you. At this moment, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. Nora Loreto is a writer, journalist, and podcast producer. She's the editor of the Canadian Association of Labor Media and the co-host of the political podcast, Sandy and Nora Talk Politics, with Sandy Hudson. An active trade unionist, Nora is the president of the Canadian Freelance Union and trains union members all over Canada in communications, organizing, and mobilization struggles. She's the author of 4 nonfiction books and writes for journals and online publications in Canada and the United States. Her latest book, Spin Doctors, How Media and Politicians Misdiagnose the COVID-19 Pandemic, was shortlisted for the 2022 Mavis Gallant Prize for Nonfiction. Please give a very warm welcome to Nora Loreto.
It's a very wide room. You're not going to get my visual jokes. You're too far away, so I'll be this side of the room. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Karl. Thank you to everyone who is associated with Tony and the Polaris Institute. One of the hats that I also wear is I'm president of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. It is a bit weird that I find myself as president of this organization, but it's been a riot. And so I am contractually obliged to remind you all that we only exist because of your money. And so please donate to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and all of that amazing research that you love so much will continue. In listening to to Karl, I remembered that the only time in my life where I submitted an essay twice was an essay that was on water, and that I relied on all of the research from Polaris to write. I wrote it in OAC. I got an A, which was nice. And then desperately, 2 years later in university, I submitted it in a second-year course. And I got the highest mark in the year, actually, of all the classes. So that was perhaps not the best lesson to learn. But it made me a very early watcher of the issues of water. Now, I am in the middle of writing a series that's called Canada in Decline. And the latest book in that series is about corporate control. And so when we were talking about who should we get who would speak for free to do the first annual lecture in Tony Clarke's memory, the obvious choice is me. Because I'm available and cheap. So one of the things that always comes up, and it came up in the session that we just had, is where do we find the solutions to the problems that are facing us? Where do we find the solutions? And we always talk as if we don't know what the solution is, right? But do we not know what the solution actually is? I don't think that there's probably a single person in this room that doesn't actually know what it takes to mess up a shareholder meeting, to freak someone out who's got a lot of power, right? To build a coalition. I mean, these are not complicated things, right? How many people in this room have built a coalition before? I mean, come on, right? It's not hard, right? You call people to come together. You make sure the people that hate each other are on opposite sides of the rooms. No, it can be a bit more complicated than that, but it really isn't. And so I'm going to talk about the corporate control of this country, and I want you to think through the whole presentation about how we have the solutions. And actually, what we have to do is we have to undo what we think the new solutions might be. Because we will never fight corporate control, we will never fight capitalism with fascist corporate tools that mine us for our data, that mine us for our ideas, that mine us for the conflict that we might engage in sometimes online, fully aware that I'm part of the problem. We'll never win unless we go back to organizing basics. So, when we're talking about corporate control in Canada, we have to go way back. We have to go back way before there was a Canada. And before there was a Canada, there was a lot of stuff that was like pre-Canada. You know, I walked by the Bank of Montreal building and it said founded in 1817. There's no Canada in 1817. Bank of Montreal is more legitimate than our country. Isn't that amazing? The Royal Bank, same thing. Probably not Desjardins. I forget how they were founded other than being founded in Lévis. Whatever, doesn't matter. This is not a Quebec crowd. So if we look back, Canada was, as a colonial project, it was a corporate project from the beginning, always, always, always. And my next book is on democratic control and democracy in Canada, and so I'm right into the research of this right now. And I think it is so interesting that when we start to look at how the colonial residents were saying, maybe we need responsible government, they're reacting to a system, a colonial system that had been set up by the British after, of course, the conquest. So we only have the British now that matter. And they're like, well, to have this, we have to have an aristocracy. Government only works if there's an aristocracy, a House of Lords, an upper chamber, the wealthy people that can have some level of balance of the crazy people that get elected that might say crazy stuff. We have to balance that out because that's too much. Average people pick the wrong people. The aristocracy is going to be where we can find ourselves some really rational and reasonable people. But what's the problem with trying to figure out your aristocracy in 1790 in a country that never really existed 100 years before? You don't have an aristocracy, not like England. And so what happens is, all of a sudden we're going to start making these corporate connections. Who controls what? What businessman is doing what? Who owns the biggest amounts of land? This starts to form who in Canada we understand to be like the ruling class. It's a corporate project from the beginning. And things like the cradle of civilization in Canada. Do you know what Parks Canada calls the cradle of civilization of modern Canadian industry? What is it? Where was this? Anyone know? What's the thing that is like, that is modern Canada? Anyone know? You probably don't even know. He's like, what the hell are you talking about, Nora? It's on the Parks website, Parks Canada website. No, not the railroads. You got to go earlier than the railroads. Not the fur trade. That's like a thing. Like, what was the infrastructure behind like the cradle of modern corporate Canada? Oh, there's no Montrealers in the room, eh? It's the Lachine Canal. Yeah, it's like, what the hell, really? Yeah, the Lachine Canal, and then canals, because what are canals? They're not just transportation, they were also power, right? Hydroelectric power, right? And so here we have this colony, this colony that is so corporate captured that, Johnny MacDonald looks at it and says, okay, like, we're never going to hold this country together unless we have a railway, right? We're never going to hold this country together unless we have a national economic policy, a national economic plan. And this then, our new aristocracy decides that we have to feed these corporate bodies in this country to give us something that's real. And so there's a plan. They start economically planning. We start to have nails built in Canada rather than shipping all of our nails in from England. That was one of the big industries on the Lachine Canal, is making nails, right? Of course, you can't build anything without nails. It makes a lot of sense, right? And so from the pre-World War I era, pre-World War II era, really, the government is oriented towards helping to create Canadian industries, get us off of American control. In fact, the first time fascism is mentioned in the House of Commons, anyone know what year that is? Doesn't matter. 1927. It's mentioned 1927, and it's mentioned by a guy who is actually the mayor of Toronto, Thomas Langdon Church. And he says, we have got a problem in Canada. We are relying on too much American energy. We have got to protect the Canadian and Welsh, because we're all one country, the Canadian and Welsh coal industries, and we need to learn from Mussolini, and he's kicking ass in Italy right now, and we got to bring some of that to Canada. Right, kind of amazing. This guy's not a fascist. I mean, he's a strong conservative. Yeah, you're like, wait a minute. These are connected. Correct. So, goes way back. We got to get ourselves off the Americans. We have to create our own industries. And the railway was a really big part of that. World War II comes, and all of a sudden, Canada figures out how to actually almost have a planned economy. An economy that is actually almost entirely run out of the ministry that is operated by C.D. Howe, right? We create overnight crown corporations, especially in industries that are sensitive. Stuff like, maybe we don't want corporate control of our uranium mining. Maybe we don't want corporate control of the arms industry, probably especially because we're hiring German prisoners of war in downtown Montreal, and no corporate person wants the risk of having all of these German POWs making ammunition for them, so it needs to be a crown corporation. And also, rubber in Japan is like kind of threatened because the Japanese are our enemies right now, and so we've got to make synthetic rubber. So let's create crown corporations to actually manufacture synthetic rubber. Wasn't even sure that we could use synthetic rubber at that point. They bring together all of the petrochemical agencies, and what do they create? They create national industries, mostly located in Sarnia, Ontario, right beside Amjanang First Nation, right? Because always in Canada, it's always the good, the bad, the good, the industry, the bad, the economic racism. To this day. And so the World War II creates the opportunity for this. It creates the opportunity to seize shipping yards that are owned, in one case, owned by an Italian who is a fascist sympathizer, but a liberal. And so the Conservatives seized his shipyards, the Dufferin shipyards in Toronto. And what happens right after World War II? We start seeing privatization. Right, privatization is a fascist concept. Privatization is a fascist concept. Because when you start to privatize things that we all could control through democratic processes, you actually create money being pushed out to a ruling class that then has more control over the government through favors, through patronage, because of their generosity, right? It was the Nazis that really perfected privatizations because they came out of fascist, like Mussolini fascism, where they were trying to nationalize industries, and the Nazis realized that actually if we privatize, we will ironically have more control over the industries than if we allow them to continue to operate as public agencies. And so we start to privatize. One of those privatizations actually privatizes the National Research Council's industrial wing. So the National Research Canada Council used to make stuff. And it gets privatized. Part of it becomes Corningware, huge Corningware factory in Scarborough, Ontario. Part of it, because the federal government says, you know what, war is over. We don't really need radar anymore. We don't need scopes and all of these kinds of instruments. Let's privatize it. And who purchases it from the federal government? Rogers Majestic Communications, right? Rogers. So finally, we are creating that aristocracy that was so necessary in the earliest days of the colony to help to run this country in different ways, right? So we have the heyday of Keynesian economic policy after World War II, and that heyday means that, fascism was really bad. We certainly don't want communism. That's even worse. Let's give Canadians just enough of what they need to get by. We'll give them public services. Of course, Canadians fight for them. We'll give them an equitable tax base to make sure that the rich and the poor divide is not enormous. And we will make sure that those jobs are well paid, that there are enough good paying jobs that, oh my God, one member of the family can work. That sounds like fiction. Jesus Christ, I never experienced that. No one in my family ever had that luxury, but my in-laws, I'm like, wow, like your mom stayed home? Yeah, crazy. It's amazing. And we have public housing builds, right? We have hundreds of thousands of housing units that are built in Canada at prices, oh my God, like in today's dollars, to buy a house on the high end of $80,000 for a 3-bedroom apartment, that was normal in the 1970s. But then what happens? We stop planning. And we allow corporate control to get even more concentrated. The first time this starts happening, the federal government sees that there is the purchase of Argus, wants to buy up a bunch of corporations to then consolidate, notably, media outlets in the late 1970s. And so the federal government says, well, this is maybe not that good. We need a Royal Commission on Corporate Concentration. And in this Royal Commission on Corporate Concentration, we're going to look at what happens if corporations become too concentrated in Canada. So the commission happens for a couple of years. And in the end, this is so hilariously Canadian. They say, actually, this is good. You know what? Corporate concentration is the only way that we will compete with the Americans, and we need to encourage corporations to concentrate, for industries to concentrate. It's so amazing. You should read this Royal Commission because it's wild. And a couple of years later, the MacDonald Commission then, on the biggest study of the current economy in Canada is done. It is a 1,200-page Royal Commission document, and in this document, it is recommended that Canada seeks markets of 100 million people to make sure that our corporations can be globally competitive. And where's the easiest market of 100 million people? The United States. Now, this Royal Commission starts under Trudeau and ends under Mulroney. Mulroney doesn't use it instantly to put free trade into action. He takes his time and starts to do his own politics to make sure that free trade is kind of the conservative brand free trade. And here we catch up to the era of the fight of free trade. Now, how many people in the room were active within the Pro-Canada Network, the Action Canada Network? Yeah, of course. It was probably the last major citizens' uprising in Canada of its size. It was, and Tony Clarke, of course, was foundational in that movement. And these were people who understood that free trade was going to end Canada as we know it, right? Already, you were having industries in Canada flee Canada for less expensive regions. First industries to go were glove making and textiles. Furniture making starts to go as well. And as we know, thanks to research by folks like Linda McQuaig, that the Americans were really keen on this, but the Canadians were really, really keen on this. And the Canadians knew that even though free trade was so unpopular, that if Canadians thought that Canadians were calling for it, it could happen. If we thought that the Americans were trying to get us into this, it would never happen. And so there's politics that starts to happen to convince Canadians that free trade is in our best interest. The first two free trade agreements get signed. One is with Canada, the United States, and the other one is with Israel, which again reminds us of how similar our countries all are, right? And with these free trade agreements, all of a sudden, there is no point for any corporation to stay in the community that it's in if it can make more money somewhere else on the planet, right? It's not like a hospital that has to operate in this region or this region or this region. If your cars can be made cheaper somewhere else, they're gonna go somewhere else. And not surprisingly, and thanks to the massive mobilization of the Action Canada Network, Canadians never supported free trade. Canadians never voted for a government that promised free trade, and Canadians never said that they wanted free trade. Now, what's so fascinating is if you look at all the retrospectives on free trade, it's a lot of, oh, the naysayers were wrong. It's fine. It's actually increased our productivity tremendously. Until you start looking at, who has benefited from free trade? Like, no one in this room has benefited from free trade. We all exist in paradigms that have shifted because of free trade. But the major beneficiaries of free trade have been the corporate class, the ownership class. And so here we are now, 4 decades after the era of neoliberalism becoming entrenched in free trade, also in Canada's whiplash back to the staples of a model of economic exploitation, right? Oil and gas is going to save us somehow, right? Even though it doesn't create jobs. In fact, Suncor is showing us right now how much they care about workers' jobs, right? And we now have a situation where the income divide between the rich and the poor has never been higher in Canadian history. And I hope you all know this. I'm sure you all know this. That corporations have made more money year over year than ever before in Canadian history. And you cannot have that level of wealth inequality without it resulting in people sleeping in parks, in the hospital system collapsing, in violence rising in schools. These are directly connected to issues to each other. And so what happens, well, the left doesn't really have any power right now. And so we hear that this is the fault of immigrants. This is the fault of refugees. This is the fault of people not working hard enough. This is the fault of, in Doug Ford's terms, people choosing basket weaving, right? Which is like, you're talking about manufacturing, man. We don't have that anymore. No one's weaving baskets. Like, come on, that would be okay if we were able to do that. So, I mean, this has all been pretty depressing. And so I thought I would leave myself 4 minutes to not be as depressing and to talk about some solutions. Okay. Because that's the challenge for this. I started off by saying that the ideas exist in this room for what we need to do, and that remains to be true. We need to organize, we need to talk to average people, and we need to confront power. And we need to confront power where it's hitting us the hardest. You know, the fact that the largest landlord of low-income housing in this country is a real estate income trust is insane, right? A real estate income trust, which its literal reason to exist is to pull money out of the pockets of the people that live in the building and give that money to shareholders. And if you give 90% of the money that you make in rent in a given year to shareholders, you are not obliged to pay any tax. That's how the REITs work. If you look at REITs within long-term care, it means that you are taking someone's pension every month and you are giving it to shareholders. And the tragedy is you're probably giving it to the shareholders of the children of the people who live in those long-term care facilities, because we've completely devastated the public pension plan. So the complexity of the issues ahead of us are really, really difficult, but there isn't many people who would say, but it's okay, this is going well. So we don't have to convince people. We have to activate people, and we have to give people the tools to be able to fight back. And so that means meeting them in their homes, in the ownership structures of the buildings that they live in, right? I mean, they've innovated mining. They're mining poor people to create these real estate. It's incredible. Oh my God, we're so amazing in Canada. We need to get together again. I've heard so many people over the course of the couple of days here saying that they love this event, they love this conference because they get to see people, right? It's like in our personal lives, we only see our family members at weddings and funerals. And in like our professional left-wing lives, we only see people at convention. And convention sucks because we're all fighting each other and we're trying to get this passed and we're all tired and everyone's like hungover or not enough hungover and whatever, right? So we have to create these spaces for joy. We have to create these spaces for action, and we have to be not cowardly. And I'll finish with this. I think that Canadians, unfortunately, by and large, are cowardly. I think we're very afraid to challenge power. And I think that it is not going to be the case that we're going to get everybody to do an office occupation or to yell something. It's really hard to challenge power. It is very, very, very hard to do it. It's very hard to do it if you've never done it, and it's really hard to do it if you're doing it alone. It becomes easier if you've done it before, and it becomes way easier if you're not alone. And so that is the challenge. Whose houses are we occupying? Whose offices are we occupying? Actually, I'm lying. I'll finish with this story. Jim Payne is a singer from St. John's, Newfoundland. Maybe you know him. He was telling me that years ago, they would go around the rich neighborhoods of St. John's at Christmas, and they would be dressed as mummers. The mummering is you cover yourself and you knock on people's doors and you try to figure out who's at your door. And they would go to the biggest houses with the cars out front where it was clear that there was parties happening, and they'd crash those parties. I think that that's the spirit that we need, frankly, because the ruling class is not afraid of us at all, because they know that we're not a threat. So we have to find ourselves threatening to them again. Thank you.
Okay, gonna allow you to take a breath. Yeah, you're good? Okay. Okay, good. Well, Nora, thank you so much, for that very powerful presentation. I want to begin with one provocative thing that you said. You said that Canadians are cowards. They're afraid of challenging power. I'm not sure if you're being true to history there, right? Like I'm just thinking right now about, for example, the Sir George Williams affair that some people might remember of 1969, where a number of students, right, at Sir George Williams University in Montreal challenged power, challenged institutional power, right? And they actually helped to change the society, right? When they were challenging the systemic racism that was endemic at Sir George Williams University at that time, and that became an international incident. There were Canadians involved in that. When you say the Canadians are afraid and cowardly, is that actually true?
Yes.
Why? Why is that true?
I think that the quintessence of being a Canadian is that you hate your boss, but you really want your boss to like you. And when you find yourself in that situation, it's very hard to put yourself on the line. And I think that, like, when I talk to people about like what is stopping you from taking radical action, let's say, and a lot of times it's very much like, I don't want to get arrested. I can't get arrested. I hear that a lot. I can't get arrested. I'm too like, my family relies on me, this kind of thing. And you know, there's a lot of structural reasons for why cowardice gets kind of put into our lives. But I think that we're too willing to accept what power says to us, generally. And of course, there are exceptions to this. I mean, I've seen tremendous actions that are not cowardly at all in thinking people scaling bridges or really confronting. I mean, I start with the story of Bill Clinette confronting Jean Chrétien in 1996, where, of course, Chrétien strangles him. Not everybody is. But I think that generally, Canadians are proud to be peaceful and don't really want that confrontation. And so it's about desensitizing someone to being afraid to take that confrontation and go, oh, actually, this is fun. Like, we can sit down in this office and not be arrested. But what worries me is that the security state is increasing, repression is increasing, and I think it is becoming even more frightening for people to take that next step into radical action.
Karl, do you agree with that? Because you've actually organized folks, and you've worked with some people who are in this room.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of where courage sometimes can be found. And I think of the Sri Lankan community that shut down the 401. I was there. I think of the indigenous community that stared down the army. I think we can all think of lots of examples where we find courage. And the thing that I take away from it is, who are those communities that are doing it? And I hear what you're saying, that there are many in the Canadian milieu that have not eaten a lot of tear gas today. And you should try it. It's actually quite exhilarating. But there's something to be said about looking at those communities that are also Canada, that have lost a lot and understand conflict and understand power and are willing to put their lives, their bodies on the line. And we need to be there alongside with them. And then I think we find courage.
But aren't there different ways of struggle? Like, there's not just one way of struggling, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking back, for those in the room who remember the mass movements, the red zone, the yellow zone, the green zones, when we were confronting the trade agreements, and we made a conscious decision to work in cells and groups to say, I'm going to go with the black bloc, and I'm going to eat tear gas today, and I'm likely going to be arrested. And you make that conscious decision, and then there's a group that says, yeah, I got a paper due tomorrow, so I'm going to go this far to the line. And then there's another group that says, I like the lawn, I'm staying where it's green, okay? I got bad knees, okay? Whatever the reasons. But the thing that bound all of that was an agreement that the diversity of tactics from red, yellow, green was okay. And in the same way, the struggles can be everything from direct confrontations with corporate entities, right down to consumer actions and boycotts and pensions, or re-regulating regulation. There's a whole, as you mentioned, we know these solutions, but we do need to put into practice those diversity of tactics at a much, much bigger scale with a lot more people in many different languages and many different colors.
I think part of the reason why I say this as well is, and when I say that I think there's cowardice, I'm not talking about activists specifically. I think this is general, and I say this because I hear from people all the time. This is the most common thing I hear, that I am courageous because I've stood up for something that's obvious. And I hear people telling me that they are petrified of losing their job, of being made into an object of something, that they just couldn't live through these kinds of attacks. And I mean, I think that we have to find ways to teach people how to live through the attacks, because they're not bad. Like I'm living proof of that. Like there's name a thing. I've experienced it, right? When it comes to kind of the consequences that you can have, professional consequences that you can have. And I think that, again, you have to create the situations for people to exercise and practice pushing up against power. And that we don't have, because it comes through social movements that have been battered in the neoliberal era, and that we have not been able to build up to the strength that we absolutely had 2 decades or 3 decades ago.
So about 20 years ago, I went on a Greyhound bus through the southern United States for a number of weeks. And I was interviewing people who were part of the civil rights movement. And one of the people that I had a chance to spend a couple of days with was Bob Moses. Some people might be familiar with that name. Bob Moses was one of the leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is one of the most important civil rights organizations of the era. And it was a youth-driven organization. And they worked with some of the most marginalized people in the society, right? You said earlier something that I'm going to push back on, right? You said that building coalitions is easy. We all know how to do that. But is that really the case, right? Like, organizing is actually hard work. And to do it well, right, you have to really ground yourself in the communities that you're, quote unquote, trying to organize. You actually have to there's a lot of work involved. You know, Bob Moses and those young people, when they were trying to organize folks in terms of getting involved propping up voting rights, right? He was trying to get them more involved. It took a lot of effort. Like, there were a lot of people who were scared. They were afraid that they would be killed. Right? So I'm wondering if you're kind of underestimating how difficult it is to organize, and if that's one of the challenges that perhaps we face in this country in terms of organizing communities.
Yeah, I think this is a problem of the English language, because when I say easy, I don't mean it's not hard work. It's easy as in you call a meeting, you bring people together. What's the hard work is to do hard work, not like complicated work, but a lot of work. Do you know what I mean? And I think that oftentimes people will ask us, like, where do I start? Where do I start? I have no idea where to start. And you say, okay, well, does your city or your community have a round table where all of the people who care about this issue come together once every 5 months to talk about that issue? No. That's easy to start there. The hard work is maintaining this and keeping things together. But I think that there is 2 generations of people that don't even know how to start it. And what I say is that it is not complicated, but it's definitely hard work. It can become complicated.
What should be the approach to organizing, right? Like, there are a lot of folks in this room who have a lot of experience in organizing, right? So, Karl, I'm going to ask this question of you and Nora. Like, what are the things that people need to learn how to do in order to organize folks properly, so that you can, in fact, confront the corporate capture that exists in the society?
I'm thinking of one of the things that Polaris did. I don't know if we would call it an internship, but we took young, bright people and put them in situations that were far beyond their means. I'm thinking of a particular example. We had an opportunity to put people who were at the beginning point in their career and expose them to what's going on. So we were in South Africa. The South African police had just arrested some of our comrades from the Landless Peoples Movement. They were holding them in the John Vorster prison. Avi Lewis, Naomi Klein, and Tony and Maud and others who said, well, Maud Barlow, we'll do a march down to John Vorster prison and we'll demand their release. And so I was in charge of putting together the group, and we were going with a candlelight visual, and we were going to be a peaceful but strong force. And I had, a couple of weeks before, hired a young woman to join our crew. And she reminded me of this afterwards. But as we were going towards this march and towards the South African police, they dropped into formation and they just opened fire on us with concussion grenades and tear gas at point blank range. And it was mayhem, and people were hurt. And my colleague who I just hired, I remember later she was turning to me, she goes, because I'd asked her an interview question some weeks ago, and I'd asked her, have you ever been in a fight? And she said with weeping eyes, I didn't know this is what you meant. So to organize, I think, is to put people into situations and to give them support, warn them that there's a concussion grenade coming at their leg, but to give people that experience. And it changes people. She limps now.
It's funny to think of all those situations. Like there was one that I will never forget where we were going to do a banner drop over the DVP in Toronto. There's a reason why people don't drop banners off the DVP. It's too high. It's way too high, and it's very illegal. And this 17-year-old comes back at, I think it was 8:30 in the morning, and he was like, well, that was a total failure because it's too high and the banner is too small. And I was like, okay, well, how was it? He was like, I ran for my life from the cops, and it was amazing, right? And he's still in the movement. And then I think of someone who was the vice president of events. So if anybody is from the student movement, you know that the vice president of events or social position is not the most political position. She was kind of put up to do this position for the grad student union at the University of Toronto. But as the vice president of events, she had the key to the gym where all of the Quebec activists were sleeping during the G20. And so she gets arrested for conspiracy and put in jail for a week. And for the week that she was in jail, we were like, what kind of person is going to emerge? Like, is she going to strangle us, or is she going to be radicalized? And of course, it changed her life, right? She came out like seeing the oppression of the state. So it is true, you have to create these positions. The mentorship is very, very important. But there's also structures that you have to be very intentional in creating. And so, are unions doing enough to pay for organizers who are doing community-based organizing? No, they're not. That's an easy place to start. The student movement is almost in collapse. What role do unions play in helping to foster the student movement? Book off time, materials, education, access to media training, all of that kind of stuff. That's really important. If you are with an organization that has space, offer your space for the coalition meeting. Call the first coalition meeting, identify other people that might be able to take it over. I mean, there really are very basic steps to take in all of this stuff. And when you get started, that's when you realize that around the room, we all have ideas and we're going to go in this direction or this direction based on the conversations that we're having. But I think that there's this, like, the internet has obliterated our sense of time. And there's a lot of people, I think, that feel like we've tried everything and nothing has worked. But then it's like, when was the last time we tried that? And it's like, oh yeah, COVID has obliterated 5 years from my brain. It's been a long time since we tried that. It's been a decade since we last tried that, even though it feels very, very, very close. So I think that is like creating those spaces is really, really important. And then you can't even imagine what can come next.
Yeah. And this space here is a very precious one, is it not? Right? Like this opportunity where you have people, this kind of intergenerational dialogue, it doesn't happen as often perhaps as it needs to. And I think as you're suggesting, people need to be more intentional when it comes to engaging folks from different generations. There's a lot of knowledge here, right? And perhaps in the society, we're not always benefiting from the knowledge of our older folks and matching them with their younger folks. Here, I wanted to mention one other thing. There's a gentleman here by the name of Neil Niles, who's right across from me, putting it on the spot. He's a carpenter from British Columbia who's been dealing with a lot of blowback at his workplace. He's been dealing with a lot of racism at his workplace. And I'm referencing Neil because Neil is from Grenada, the island of Grenada, but has been in this country for about 15 years. There was a Marxist revolutionary from Grenada named Bernard Cord, and that's a name that you'd be familiar with. Some people here might remember Maurice Bishop, right? The name Maurice Bishop. Bernard Cord had this saying that revolution is not instant coffee, right? Which I've always felt was a really kind of important line. I've always kind of loved that line. But it's this idea that change just doesn't happen by spontaneous generation, right? That it takes time. And that sometimes people can get discouraged very quickly, right? Because things aren't happening as quickly as they would like. And particularly when it comes to confronting corporate power. So I'm wondering if maybe the two of you can kind of think about that idea, like that, this notion of revolution not being instant coffee. And what does that mean when it comes to organizing and trying to create the kind of world that you want to live in?
Thank you, Adrian. That's really good. I remember when I was very naive and immortal, that I could imagine we would make some change. And I realized I wasn't asking a big enough question. You know, what to do this type of stuff is lifetimes of work. So we're starting something, and grandkid number 3 is going to have to pick up some of this slack. So you're right, it's not instantaneous. We do have to take the long view, but we have to bite off what we can chew in the time that we are here. And I would add,
and also recognize progress.
And recognize progress. But I think you hit on something with reaching out across. We also have to think, because corporations have been working internationally for a very long time. And sometimes our work and our focus is very community. It's very local, regional, national, Canadian. But the corporate entity is global in scale, and I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they're thinking even beyond this planet in some ways.
And they're intentional.
And they're intentional about it. But we also need to think about who our allies are internationally. And I keep coming back to those supply chains, those depots. They're big, they're powerful, and they're vulnerable because they're big and they're powerful. And we have allies in many places, in many spaces. And so we need to think about that and utilize it.
Yeah, I love that saying that it's revolution's not instant coffee, because no one likes instant coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like the older I get, the more I realize that the passage of time, obviously changes. Like as you age, time vanishes, right? And what used to be an hour is now 5 minutes, and you can't believe how fast it's gone. And I was just doing a lecture at a cégep in Laval, and one of the questions the students asked was like, "What's the role of young people in action?" And I said, "Well, I mean, for me, it was that I felt like I had all the time in the world as a young person, and I could dedicate all of the time I had to social justice." Now, to do that, you have to pace yourself. You can't expect to see victories. My first real heartbreak was the electoral reform referendum in 2007 in Ontario. I thought for sure we were going to win because everyone I knew was going to vote for electoral reform, right? What a wake-up call. I mean, a third of people did vote for it, so it's not insignificant. But that's where the role of older activists is so important, because it's to say, you know, we experience time differently and we see time differently based on where we are in our lives. And if you are a young person expecting to see change tomorrow, you need someone to put the brakes on you and say, that's not how this works.
Maybe it's also that you never really do win, right?
Never.
And when I say that, I mean that the struggle is every day, and that sometimes the history that you think you made can be reversed, right? Like you actually go back. So you actually think that you've made progress, right? And we're seeing it perhaps in this moment right now, where a lot of things that people thought they had won, right? They thought that there had been a victory, right? That thing that maybe you took for granted shouldn't have been taken for granted, right? So perhaps the idea is that you have to struggle every day.
Well, I mean, there's no reason to exist if we're not struggling, right? I mean, this is the thing that you learn when you're an activist. It's like the only reason to exist is to serve someone else.
Frederick Douglass, right? No struggle, no progress.
Exactly, right? And if you don't have that experience to realize that the only reason we exist is to make someone else's life better, you know, whether that is someone else is your kids, or whether that someone else is your neighbor, or whether that someone else is an entire unit of workers that you are a member of or that you represent, that is the only thing that can give you satisfaction and happiness.
You know,
literally.
I think it's somewhat related, but the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, you know, once said that your job is to free other people, right? Like, and when you're in a position of power, right, when you're supposed to kind of, your job is to help others. Like that's the whole point of the exercise.
Yeah, and then you realize that there's a lot of people that don't want to help others, and it breaks your heart. You can't imagine how they exist on this planet. And then you realize, oh, we're on different sides.
Yeah. I want to take issue with another thing that you said. I'm taking issue with a lot of things you said.
It's great.
To
We've
Nora.
never had this chance to do this, so this is perfect.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to wrap up in a second. But you said that we allowed corporate control, right? We allowed corporate control. And again, I wonder if is that really true? Right? Like corporations have a lot of power. Like there has been a concerted effort there's been an assault on the idea of the public, right? Just the very idea of the commons, the idea of anything public has been sullied over the last 30, 40 years, right? Where anything public is seen as being not as efficient, or it's not as competent, or it's not as connected to, that it is somehow deficient. Is that also not a problem?
Well, it's funny. I've been spending a lot of time in the hospital, as many people know. And when you talk to people taking your blood, you learn, in Quebec anyway, they're like, oh, actually, we made a mistake. The private sector did not do blood work and blood labs as well as we had in the hospitals. We're starting to see them come back. And so just as things can be undone, bad ideas can be undone as well. But that's a good question. Did we allow this, or was this something that was imposed on us? You know, we live in a democracy, in theory. The democracy is deeply broken. And I think that it feels like we make a decision.
Democracies are always broken.
They're always broken, of course. Okay. Yeah, no, of course they are. But, you know, seeing the difference between English Canada and French Canada, I mean, there are certain things that if you do in French Canada, people are in the streets tomorrow.
When I say they're always broken, I'm not trying to be flippant, but what I mean is that nothing's ever perfect.
No, of course not. No, of course not. But I do think that, we have allowed, the fact that the people of this country have not figured out how to organize ourselves in such a way to stop what the liberals and the conservatives have cooked up in their minds to be what we should do in this country, which is this massive bonanza of profits. And if we had not allowed that, we would have found other ways to fight against those structures. We would have resisted neoliberalism. Now, maybe we can say that's impossible because these are global forces and they're bigger than all of us, and unfortunately we were somewhat powerless in all of this. I don't know if that's totally true. I think that if you look at how struggle has stagnated in the last 20 years, it's very hard for me to say that we did everything we could to stop that. I don't think we did. Now, maybe us in this room, we all personally did. But this is where I look to left-wing institutions and say, I think that we've perhaps started to fail, or maybe we did not do. Maybe we took third wayism too seriously. Maybe we became too corporate in our structures. Maybe we started chasing the wrong victories. Maybe we started ignoring the working class who's not unionized, who's not white, who's not making good salaries in good union jobs. That's when I say we. I think that's the failure. We may have continued to fail anyway, but if we were going to get real brass knuckles about this conversation, it would be, I think that our many of our institutions have not risen to the challenge that we face.
Well, the brass knuckles will be put to me if I don't wrap this up soon. But I did want, Karl, did you want to comment on that?
Very quickly, I would say that some of the corporations have shown us through their prowess and their greed just how they're going to fall under their own weight. Loblaws and the price of bread, Carney and Brookfield, Amazon, Trump. These are not super smart people, okay? And people can see through it. They can see what it is. And so the bigger they grow, they're going to fall. And we just have to be there with the tightrope.
Nora, I want to give you the last word, right? With your keynote, you delivered the keynote speech. Do you have anything final that you'd like to say to people before we wrap up?
Oh my God. Well, I think that we are in this interesting moment where the NDP has collapsed. There's a leadership race on. People have a lot of hope in the leadership race to turn this ship around. And I think that if we think that the solution to the current problem is social democracy, I think we will continue to bump up against the same problems. And that's not very hopeful, because I'm probably a minority in the room of the people that think that. But I really think that if we look at our history, what has always made the left stronger, sharper, more activist, more able to fight the right and the far right, it was having strong socialist groups, strong socialist thinking and theorists. And if we think of even socialist groups that existed very well into the mid 2000s, they're gone. A lot of them have collapsed. And so I do think my big pitch is socialism is important, and we need to rebuild it because it has an impact on social democracy, and it has a very important impact on how the conservatives and liberals think that they can do certain things or not do certain things. So that's my pitch, but I don't even have a socialist group to say then buy my newspaper. So
Nora Loreto and Karl Flecker, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And right now, it's my honor to invite Karl Clarke to come forward and say a few words. Karl.
This is just going to be a really short few words. Yeah, what can I say after listening to these folks, eh? Wouldn't they great? First of all, our son, Chris, who's here tonight, and our daughter, Tanya, and I would like to thank the Center for Policy Alternatives for hosting this inaugural lecture of the Tony Clarke Speaker Series tonight. I would also like to thank Erica and this guy, Karl. I've known Karl much longer than I've known Erica. He's been in our house many times, and he and Tony weren't always this way. They were often, there wasn't always kumbaya. It was often, I think I'm right, no, you're right. So I've seen that and heard it and experienced it. As we all know, we're living in very, very difficult times for individual people, for our communities that we live in, for the world, with all the uncertainty that is happening every day. I know Tony would be very, very proud, as I am, of everyone in this room who contributes to making our communities, our world, a more just and human place for us all to be. So thank you, and take care of yourselves.
I didn't write a wrap-up, but I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. I want to thank our wonderful panel. I want to thank Karl. I want to thank Tony. Thanks to all of you as well for being here and for everything you do every day to continue on in the tradition of just doing better for each other and making progress with and not at the expense of each other. Thanks, everyone.